Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshvari Mata ki jai. We'll go on with chapter 37 from the Devi Bhagavatam, Retold. Janamajaya said, "Ah, Muni, my heart yearns for more of your sweet Purana. I'm amazed to hear how Vishnu himself, who is above karma, was born into the world as a horse, and the Devi Lakshmi as a mare. Indeed, how is it that karma ensnares us all? O Vedavyasa, why is life so full of grief?" Vyasa said, "Brahma's mind-born son, the great Narada, is an eternal wanderer. Once his brother Daksha's sons, who wanted to be the first creators of the race of men, came to their uncle Narada. Narada said to them, 'How can you be creators unless you know all there is to be known? Do you know the ends of the universe?' They replied they did not. Narada said, 'First go and discover the ends of the universe, then come back and become creators.' And those children went off on their quest from which they would never return. When Daksha heard of this, he cursed Narada. 'Be you also a wanderer forever, for the eternal wandering you have sent my children on.' So it was by his father Brahma's power, Narada can go where he pleases with just a thought. And by his brother Daksha's curse, he has no permanent dwelling, but is an iterant always. Once Narada and Muni arrived in my ashram. He played effortlessly, beautifully on his veena, and was full of ecstatic songs. He sang hymns from the Samaveda, and he sang the Gayatri sweet as Amrita. When I had welcomed him with padya, water to wash his feet, and agya, milk and honey, flowers and incense, which are the proper ways to receive such a holy Muni, we sat together under a tree that grew near my ashram. I was unhappy then, and he asked me, 'Vedavyasa, knower of the Vedas, what grief clouds your heart?' I sighed and said to him, 'Great Narada, what joy is there in this world? I have lived long enough, but sorrow stalks all my days, and nowhere on this earth is true happiness to be found, or peace of mind. Yet souls incarnate repeatedly into this bhumi, as if in helpless enchantment. Take my own life, Muni. I was born on an island in the river. My father left before I ever knew him. My mother abandoned me for shame, and I grew by myself in the jungle among wild beasts. Then I took myself to sacred Meru and sat in tapasya to Mahadeva Shiva. He blessed me with what my heart desired, with my son Sukha. He was a brilliant child and learned all I had to teach him, the Vedas and the Vedangas, the Puranas, and even the Shastras, which I knew myself. And I was delighted. Then my son became your Shisha for a while, and he was obsessed with moksha. He attained mukti, O Muni. He left me forever. I was demented with grief. I abandoned my ashram on Golden Meru and wandered down into Bharatvarsha again, ranging the earth like a madman for the sorrow that tore at me. I suddenly thought of my mother's Satyavati. I came down to the Kuru kingdom and sought the fisherman's hut beside the Yamuna near the island where I had been born. I thought I would find my mother, and perhaps she could console me. Instead, I learned she had married King Santanu of the Kurus and gone to live in the palace in Hastinapura. I built an ashram on the banks of the Saraswati and began living there. In a few years, Santanu died, and my mother was left with two sons, Chitraganda and Vichitraviraya. Santanu's first son, by the Devi Ganga, looked after them. Bhishma, of course, had sworn an oath of celibacy himself. In time, Bhishma crowned Chitrangada king of the Kurus. But Chitrangada did not live long. A Gandharva killed him because he had the same name as the elf. My mother Satyavati mourned. Bhishma had renounced his right to the throne when my mother married Santanu. It was the condition on which Satyavati's father gave his daughter to the old king, that her sons would rule after him. Bhishma crowned Vichitravirya king, and one day he abducted 3 daughters of the king of Kasi from the very Swayamvara to be Vichikara's queens. The eldest, Amba, never married my brother, but her sisters, Ambika and Ambalika, did. But before they could have any children, Vishvavirya caught a virulent consumption, and he died. Ambika and Ambikala wanted to commit sati on the husband's funeral pyre, but my mother, Satyavati, forbade that. For if they did not have sons, how would the Kuru's throne have an heir? Satyavati begged Bhishma to take his brother's widows to be his wives, but he would not break the oath he had sworn in the names of his father and all the gods. My mother was desperate for a time, and then Bhishma himself told her, "Some sages of the forest say to him that in such a crisis a rishi may be asked to father sons on the young widows." When I was born on the river, my father gave my mother Satyavati a mantra she could summon me with if she ever wanted to see me. Now she remembered that mantra, and that she herself had a son who was also a rishi. I was as much Vichitravirya's brother as Bhishma was, and my mother called me to her subtly with the mantra. I appeared in Hastinapura, and Satyavati told me why she had thought of me after so long. She wanted me to sire the heirs to the Kuru's throne on Ambika and Ambilika. And so I did. That first night, I went to make love to Ambika, but she was so afraid when she saw me, wild as I was, dark and with my beard and tangled jata, that she shut her eyes tightly as we made love. I cursed her, and I said, "Let your son be born blind." The next night, I went to her sister Ambalika's bedchamber. She too was frightened of me, but my mother had warned her about shutting her eyes. She had told the young queen that I cursed her sister. Ambalika kept her eyes open somehow, but she turned white as a sheet when she saw me. I cursed her as well, but more gently. "Let your son be born as pale as you were when we were together." I went away from Hastinapura. In their time, Ambika and Ambalika gave birth to 2 strapling sons. Ambika's boy was born blind, and we named him Drishtarashtra. Ambalika's prince was born an albino, and he was called Pandu. Now, when I returned to Hastinapura to bless those children, Satyavati begged me to visit Ambika once more in the night. She said that if she herself had another son, she would not have to trouble me like this. Moreover, she wanted a grandchild who was whole in all his parts. I agreed and went again to Ambika's room that night. The chamber was dark, no lamp burned within. A young woman waited for me in the darkness. She was young and beautiful and surprised me with her ardor. It seemed the young queen I had been with the last time, who had shut her eyes in fear and lain still as a corpse under me, had changed a great deal. Now she was passionate and without inhibition, and we spent a rapturous night together. However, when the sun rose in the morning, I saw I had not made love at all to Ambika, but to her maidservant, who was like her in form, and even their faces were similar. But there the resemblances ended. I began to laugh and bless that warm girl. "You shall have a son, whole in all parts, handsome and intelligent and serene beyond all common measures. He shall be an embodiment of Dharma in the world." When he was born, her son was called Vidura. Strangely now, in my own mind, I began to think that those 3 princes as my sons, for so indeed they were. Slowly the grief in my heart for Sukha, who had died, left me. I became a regular visitor to Hastinapura as my sons grew into fine princes. Sometimes I would spend some months in the city before I went back to my ashram beside the Saraswati. When I felt I was again growing too attached to Dhristaratha, Pandu, and Vidura, I would tell myself, can I really think of these boys as my sons? Why, when I died, they can hardly perform my shraddha, considering how they were conceived. The 3 of them grew apace, and Dhristaratha, the eldest, was made king. But since he was blind, his brother Pandu ruled. Pandu was a great conqueror, and the Kuru kingdom grew immeasurably during their reign. Then Bhishma had Dhritarashtra married to the princess Gandhari of Gandhara kingdom, and Panda to 2 princesses, Kunti and of the Vrishnis and Madri of Madra. I thought, oh Narada, that now fortune smiled on my sons and me. How wrong I was. Fate was waiting in the wings to remind me powerfully that all attachment is folly. Once Pandu took his 2 wives to a forest at the foothills of the Himalayas. There he shot a rishi and his woman with his arrows while they were making love, mistaking them as a stag and a hind. As they died, the rishi cursed Pandu, if you ever make love to a woman again, you will perish. Grief-stricken, Pandu abandoned his life as Ksatra. He decided he would never return to Hastinapura and remained in the jungle with Kunti and Madri. Slowly he learned to control desires on pain of death, but then he yearned to have sons. Now, when Kunti was a young girl, the rishi Durvasa, who saw far into the future, had taught her a secret mantra. It was a mantra for summoning the devas of the heavens and for having children by them. So using it in the forest, when her husband begged her to, Kunti had 3 splendid sons by devas, Dharma, Vayu, and Indra himself. These sons of the gods were born for a great purpose of destiny. They were born to rule the world. They were called Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjuna. Kunti said the mantra for Madri also, and she gave birth to 2 magnificent twins whose fathers were the Ashwin twins of the heaven. Those princes were called Nakula and Sahadeva. All 5 princes grew in the forest, and they had their own early tutelage from their father and the Munis of the Vana. But one day, when Yudhishthira was 16, Pandu saw Madri bathing in the silvery forest stream. He was seized suddenly by desire that he no longer cared if he lived. He forced himself upon her on the soft moss beside the stream, and he died. Later, Madri committed sati on his pyre. The Munis of the Vana took Kunti and the 5 Pandavas back to Hastinapura, the city of elephants. Then on, the sons of Pandu grew in the city of their father. Bhishma, Vidura, and the blind Dhritarashtra, the king, made no difference between Pandavas and his own sons, the 100 Kauravas. But from the first, the eldest Kaurava prince, Duryodhana, and his brothers loathed their cousins. Those 100 sons of the blind king were evil princes, and they hated the thought that Pandu's eldest son, the noble Yudhishthira, would sit upon the ancient throne of the Kurus one day. Meanwhile, the Brahmana, Drona, arrived in Hastinapura, and he became guru to the young princes. He taught them the Vedas and the Puranas, and most of all, he taught them archery and the use of occult weapons. And then even before she was married, Kunti had used the mantra Durvasa gave her in her father's palace. The burning sun appeared before her and sired a child on the young princess. Her son was born magically immediately, and he wore golden earrings and armor at his birth, which grew mysteriously with him. Suryadeva vanished before her eyes, and she was left with the unearthly infant. In terror, she stole down to the river, flowing near her father's palace, and floated that child down its current in a wooden box. A Sutta charioteer found that shining infant and brought him home to his wife Radha. The couple were childless, and they raised Kama, as they called him, as their son. Later, he was not to become a charioteer like his father, but the greatest archer on earth. For though he never knew it until near the end of his unhappy life, he was the purest of Kshatras. He was also the Pandavas' eldest brother. But neither they nor he knew this. And Kama became Duryodhana, the Kaurava's dearest friend. Indeed, he became sworn enmity of his brothers. Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshvari Mata ki jai, Bule Baba ki jai.